This is Time and Other Thieves, Reflections and Conversations on the Nature of Existence. This episode originally aired in radio format on October 7th, 2021. My name's Sarah B., and today I'm going to talk about Jack Kerouac. There was a guy who had a thing or two to say about the nature of existence. Or maybe it was really just the one thing. Existence is heartbreaking. It is heartbreak. At least that's what I always experience when reading Kerouac's books. Everything broke that guy's heart, and bless his heart for it. Kerouac is also a fitting focus for this show because he was a philosopher and a deeply spiritual person. He walked this earth surrounded by angels and holy things, or at least that is how he so often perceived the people and the natural world around him. He is perhaps most often quoted as saying, "The only people for me are the mad ones, the ones who are mad to live, mad to talk, mad to be saved, desirous of everything at the same time, the ones who never yawn or say a commonplace thing, but burn, burn, burn like fabulous yellow Roman candles exploding like spiders across the stars." That's taken from On the Road, the 1957 novel that put Kerouac on the literary map, where he has remained ever since, often to the consternation of critics and scholars. In college, I had a black and white poster of his face with that quote in typewriter font underneath it. He had a really good face, and his voice was unbelievable. Would I love Jack Kerouac's writing as much as I do if he didn't sound that way and look that way once upon a time? If there wasn't this whole mystique to him? I like to think so, but I guess I can't know for sure. He's an easy one to mythologize. He mythologized himself in his novels, all 14 of which were taken straight from his own life. Whether he calls himself Sal Paradise, Jack Duluoz, or Ray Smith, when you read those books, you are seeing things the way Jack Kerouac saw things. And you are noticing the things he noticed, and even dreaming his dreams. You empathize so deeply that he becomes you as you read, and you become him, and so you can't help but love him and mythologize him. Unless, of course, you don't like him. You find his writing too self-centered, his plots too non-existent. You don't see the charm in his spontaneous bop prosody, as he called it, and would prefer he use more periods and commas and paragraph breaks. You're bored by the narrator getting drunk all the time and then hating himself for it. You're somehow not enlivened by his detailed depictions of Neil Cassidy, a.k.a. Dean Moriarty, or Cody Pomeroy, driving a car, chopping wood, raising his eyebrows, eating, drinking, smoking, walking, and most of all, talking. You're maybe not interested in that particular slice of American history, the Beat Generation, mostly a bunch of white guys on pills or booze or acid or weed pontificating. The most well-known among them, along with Kerouac, who was known as the King of the Beats, were Allen Ginsberg, William Burroughs, Gary Snyder, and, of course, Neil Cassidy, who was more of a muse than an artist, though he did write a novel called The First Third. His free-flowing letter-writing style was a huge early influence on Kerouac. But yeah, a lot of people don't like Kerouac. His writing just doesn't do it for them, plain and simple. And maybe they also think he's a misogynist. In either case, I get it. I can see why people would think him a misogynist, but I do not think of him like that. The only thing Kerouac really hated was himself. And I can see why people don't like his writing. It's not for everyone. But I love it. I've gotten much great joy from reading Kerouac's breathless prose and having such intimate encounters with the remarkable people he surrounded himself with. Even when reading about his darkest and most desperate moments as a guilt-shackled Catholic bodhisattva alcoholic, I've experienced a kind of joy, a contact with real life. It's ironic that Kerouac was uncomfortable with physical nudity, given how nakeder than naked his writing was. Ironic, too, that his unbridled stream of consciousness prose style ultimately had a stripping away effect, getting you right down to the bone and marrow of this person who will never happen again, named Jack Kerouac. Today I'm going to focus on Kerouac's religious life in particular, and how Catholicism and Buddhism, and his attempts to integrate the two influenced his work. I'll be sharing passages from the master's thesis of one Emily Patricia Simpson, who just so happens to be my sister, titled Religious Turmoil, the Conflict Between Buddhism and Catholicism in Jack Kerouac's Life and Writing. Emily tracks this conflict as it's revealed in the novels Visions of Gerard, The Dharma Bums, and Big Sur. She wrote her thesis in 2003 as a graduate student at NC State University. She later shifted her focus from English literature to the law, studying at Temple University in Philadelphia, where she still resides today. I'm grateful to her for giving me permission to use her work in this episode. Kerouac's religious plight began in infancy. Christened Jean-Louis Lebris de Kerouac, Jack was the third child of Leo Kerouac and Gabrielle Levesque, born on March 12, 1922, in the blue-collar town of Lowell, Massachusetts. Jack, nicknamed T. Jean, his sister Caroline, and his brother Gerard grew up steeped in the devout Catholicism that characterized Lowell's Franco-American population. A hard-working mill town, Lowell's residents were predominantly Catholic and considered Catholicism an essential part of their lives. As Richard Sorrell points out in a journal article from 1982, the Franco-American church elite saw themselves and their followers as the only pure Catholic nationality who would expand the kingdom of God and expose the false material values of Protestantism. Religion ideally thus became a way of life rather than just part of daily existence. In this environment, Kerouac developed his belief in the, quote, terrible holy majesty of the Roman Catholic Church as a young child. Like most children in Lowell, the Kerouac children attended Catholic school, played with Catholic friends, and spent countless hours memorizing the catechism. This foundation shaped the religious outlook that Kerouac would carry throughout his life. When T. Jean was 4 years old, his world was turned upside down by the death of his 9-year-old brother. Gerard had been sick for most of his life, suffering from a rheumatic heart accompanied by many other complications. Gerard was instrumental in Jack's religious training, though he was but a toddler at the time, as Kerouac illustrates in Visions of Gerard. When Gerard was well enough, he devoted significant energy to teaching T. Jean essential Christian qualities such as reverence, compassion, gentleness, and humility. By all accounts, everyone who knew Gerard adored him. Indeed, he often was viewed as a child saint, a tradition among French Canadians. Even after Gerard's death, Jack lived in his shadow. Throughout his life, Kerouac would idolize Gerard, holding him up as the model of religious purity. He wrote Visions of Gerard from late December 1955 through early January 1956. While sitting at his sister's kitchen table in Rocky Mount, North Carolina, and claimed it was his favorite of his own works. Visions of Gerard chronicles the short life of his brother, as seen through the eyes of both young Jack Kerouac and the Kerouac sitting on the other side of a gulf dividing his youth from his adulthood. Writing to Gary Snyder on January 16, 1956, Kerouac refers to Visions of Gerard as a, quote, full-length book of sorrows, and notes that he would have liked to call the book St. Gerard the Child. Throughout the novel, Kerouac highlights his brother's saintliness, often presenting his own spiritual condition, both at the time and as a young child, in striking contrast to his brother's holiness. The book offers interesting insight into Kerouac's complicated view of the Catholic Church and his relationship to it, as his attitude fluctuates among reverence, awe, fear, respect, and doubt. Perhaps most significantly, though, is that although Kerouac wrote the book during the height of his Buddhist studies, the author of Visions of Gerard sounds decidedly Catholic. The book opens with Kerouac stating that on the day of his brother's death, quote, "The nuns of St. Louis de France parochial school were at his bedside to take down his dying words because they'd heard his astonishing revelations of heaven delivered in catechism class on no more encouragement than it was his turn to speak." He continues on to explain that, quote, "The first 4 years of my life are permeant and gray with the memory of a kindly, serious face bending over me and being me and blessing me, the world a hatch of Duluo's saintliness, and him the big chicken, Gerard, who warned me to be kind to little animals and took me by the hand on forgotten little walks." From the novel's outset, then, Kerouac establishes Gerard as an exemplar of Christian piety who serves as a role model and mentor for his younger brother. Visions of Gerard is Kerouac's most direct statement about death and dying, but also about what it is to be the surviving brother of a boy who, by all accounts, fulfilled and surpassed the superhuman demands of Franco-American Catholicism. As Kerouac makes clear on several occasions, he seemed to believe that Gerard was the only Kerouac brother worthy of Christian heaven. This sustained belief in his inferiority to Gerard played a role in the survival guilt that one biographer pinpoints as a central anxiety in Kerouac's life. Kerouac devotes many passages in Visions of Gerard to the boy's descriptions of heaven, which ring with the idealism and romance inherent to the childhood imagination. In Kerouac's eyes, Gerard perceives religion and the rewards of faith as pure, simple beauty. This notion would have been appealing to Kerouac, whose own theological perspective was far more complicated, and he comes back to it time and again throughout the novel. In one of the dozens of heaven passages in Visions of Gerard, Gerard announces, "When I get to heaven, the first thing I'm going to ask God for is a beautiful little white lamb to pull my wagon. I'd like to be there right away and not have to wait." Kerouac further elucidates Gerard's vision of heaven in a passage in which Gerard has nodded off in school and is dreaming that the Virgin Mary is leading him back to heaven, from which he has apparently strayed without knowing it. The most significant aspect of Gerard's dream of heaven, and a central idea in the novel itself, is his revelation that we are already in heaven. After briefly describing his dream to Sister Marie and his classmates, Gerard exclaims, "Don't be afraid, my good sister, we're all in heaven, but we don't know it. Oh, we don't know it." This notion is not new to religious thought nor literature. Dostoevsky had put almost the same words in the mouth of Father Zosima's saintly brother in the Brothers Karamazov, and even there it was really a simple derivative from the gospel notion that those who don't see and hear God on earth lack the proper eyes and ears. Kerouac's decision to include this revelation in Visions of Gerard is no simple tipping of the hat to previously conceived notions, though. Gerard's belief that we're all in heaven provides a tidy solution to one of the central problems presented in the novel, namely, why it is that Gerard's benevolent God allows suffering in the world. Gerard's revelation that we are all in heaven implies that if our everyday consciousness is merely a kind of dream that diverts our attention away from our true existence, i.e. in heaven, such as Gerard envisions in his dream, then any suffering we endure in this place is not actually real. If our true abode is in heaven and there is no suffering there, then the suffering we perceive to be reality is merely an illusion we can overcome by recognizing where we truly dwell. Gerard's God does not actually allow his children to suffer, but he leaves it up to us to use our faith in the immediacy of heaven to transcend our earthly suffering. While Kerouac's central focus in Visions of Gerard remains on the Catholic Church, the novel also abounds with Buddhist thought that Kerouac manages to successfully blend with Christian doctrine. For example, while the vision of heaven Kerouac presents through Gerard is classically Christian, complete with winged angels and fluffy white lambs for children, the notion that we already are in heaven, but do not know it, also has Buddhist echoes. One of the elements of Buddhism that most appealed to Kerouac was the notion that we can overcome suffering by transcending earthly weaknesses, such as ignorant craving, as is promised in the Third Noble Truth. Both Gerard's conclusion that we already are in heaven and the Buddhist approach to overcoming suffering center on changing our frame of mind and being. Both revelations rest on the notion that much of our perception of reality actually is an illusion that blocks our true religious vision. It's important to note, however, that Kerouac does not advocate an outright denial of matter, only a retuning of our perception. Kerouac draws an explicit parallel between Gerard and the Catholicism he represents and Buddhism early in the book. He writes, "It was only many years later that I recalled the definite and immortal idealism which had been imparted to me by my holy brother, and even later with the discovery, or dull-mouthed, amazed, hang-middled, mind-burnt, waking rediscovery of Buddhism, awakenedhood, amazed recollection that from the very beginning I, whoever I or whatever I was destined indeed to meet, learn, understand Gerard and the blessed Lord Buddha and my sweet Christ too through all his Paulian tangles and bloody crosses of heathen violence, to awaken to pure faith in the bright one truth, all is well, practice kindness, heaven is nigh." Kerouac not only draws parallels between Gerard's and his own Catholicism and Buddhist teachings, but he also makes a connection between the figure of Gerard himself and Buddhism. I see there in the eyes of Gerard the very diamond kindness and patient humility of the brotherhood ideal, propounded from afar down the eternal corridors of Buddhahood and compassionate sanctity, in nirmana, appearance, kaya, form, my own brother, a spot of sainthood in the endless globular universes and chili-cosm, his heart under the little shirt as big as the sacred heart of thorns and blood depicted in all the humble homes of French-Canadian Lowell. Kerouac handles it well in Visions of Gerard, the difficult task of merging the Catholicism of his youth with the Buddhism of his mature years. This merger unravels in later novels, notably in The Dharma Bums and Big Sur, as the essential conflict between Kerouac's born religion and his adopted one reemerges with increasing intensity. Now I'll move into a reflection on The Dharma Bums. In preparing for this episode, I reread The Dharma Bums, which I hadn't read since I was an undergrad at Appalachian State University nearly 20 years ago, and I was truly delighted to discover that I still very much loved it. It checks all those Kerouac boxes for me. It's got hitchhiking, actual hiking, parties, tender conversations, and multiple moments of profound introspection, some ecstatic and others despairing. I found myself quite riveted to the page for much of the time I spent reading it, time that flew by. His descriptions of meditating in the woods behind his mother's house in Rocky Mount are just as compelling as his depiction of ascending Matterhorn Peak in California's Sierra Nevada. Written in November and December of 1957, The Dharma Bums chronicles the time Kerouac spent with poet Gary Snyder in 1955 and 1956 in California. Snyder already was a devout Buddhist when he and Kerouac met, and the younger man served as a mentor to Kerouac as he deepened his immersion in the religion. Though the novel centers on Buddhism, we see Kerouac vacillating between Buddhist and Catholic perspectives, often attempting to reconcile them. While he was largely able to achieve this reconciliation in Visions of Gerard, he was unable to do so by the time he wrote The Dharma Bums, because the deeper Kerouac delved into Buddhism, the stronger the opposing Catholic force within him seemed to grow. Consequently, the book exudes a tension not found in Visions of Gerard, revealing both the tension Kerouac's religious conflict produced in him personally, as well as the particular charge it had begun to give his writing. The tension that pervades the Dharma bums becomes apparent from the novel's first pages. In Chapter 1, readers learn that the Buddhism that inspired the work has since fizzled out. Ray Smith, that's Kerouac's character, says, "I reminded myself of the line in the Diamond Sutra that says, 'Practice charity without holding in mind any conceptions about charity, for charity, after all, is just a word.' I was very devout in those days and was practicing my religious devotions almost to perfection. Since then, I've become a little hypocritical about my lip service and a little tired and cynical, because now I am grown so old and neutral." This passage creates an unstable footing for all the Buddhism to come in the book. From the beginning, we know that, despite Smith's current enthusiasm for his newfound religion, it will not last. Through Ray Smith, Kerouac acknowledges his retreat from Buddhist fervor to cynical neutrality. Significantly, the scene immediately preceding Smith's musings on the Diamond Sutra offers a hint as to the source of the problem. Smith has just offered to share his bread and wine with an old hobo, an action which, quote, evokes moods of compassion and communion, according to critic William Woods. Woods notes that this imagery is as pointedly Christian as the narrator's reflections on it are specifically Buddhist. The Dharma Bums offers many glimpses of a serene Kerouac who seems to truly embrace Buddhism as the path to enlightenment, both for himself and for others. In one moving passage, Kerouac writes, "I prayed that God or Tathagata would give me enough time and enough sense and strength to be able to tell people what I knew, as I can't even do properly now, so they'd know what I know and not despair so much." A similar sense of peace often embraces Smith while visiting his family in Rocky Mount, North Carolina. Kerouac describes one of his many late-night meditations in the woods. "I immediately fell into a blank, thoughtless trance wherein it was again revealed to me, this thinking has stopped, and I sighed because I didn't have to think any more and felt my whole body sink into a blessedness surely to be believed, completely relaxed and at peace with all the ephemeral world of dream and dreamer and the dreaming itself." In these moments, we see a hopeful Kerouac, believing he finally will achieve spiritual tranquility through Buddhism. As Ray says, quote, "O wise and serene spirit of awakenerhood, everything's all right forever and forever and forever, and thank you, thank you, thank you, amen." Unfortunately, these moments share company with far more confusing and troubling spiritual murmurings, both from within Smith himself and from his family. When Smith tries to explain his great revelation that everything is empty but awake, his mother and sister come back at him by saying, "You and your Buddha, why don't you stick to the religion you were born with?" Like Smith's mother, Kerouac's mother did not understand why he turned to Buddhism and often urged him to rededicate himself to Catholicism. The Dharma Bums clearly illustrates the hold Catholicism still has on Kerouac through the many biblical references that he includes throughout the novel and through several discussions and meditations centered on Christianity. For example, one of the more peaceful familial scenes in the novel is set on Christmas Eve, when Smith is staying with his family in Rocky Mount. "I took out the Bible and read a little St. Paul by the warm stove in the light of the tree. Let him become a fool, that he may become wise. And I thought of good dear Jaffe and wished he was enjoying Christmas Eve with me. Already are ye filled, says St. Paul. Already are ye become rich. The saints shall judge the world." There are many more Bible quotations and references in the Dharma Bums, such as when Ray, Jaffe, and Morley spend a night camping before climbing the Matterhorn. Though this climb functions primarily as a Buddhist exercise, Kerouac interjects a Christian note. Quote, "I thought, what a strange thing is man. Like in the Bible it says, 'Who knoweth the spirit of man that looketh upward?' As if suggesting the subtle pervasiveness of Christianity, even Ray's friend Cody quotes the Bible. Shortly thereafter, Ray finds himself listening to a woman preach a sermon in Chinatown Park, who says, Remember that we know that all things work together for good to them that loves God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. Romans 8:18, young'uns. When Ray exults that the woman is the greatest preacher in the world, Jaffe condemns all that Jesus stuff she's talking about. This comment obviously strikes a nerve in Ray and gives him the opportunity to vocalize his internal attempts to reconcile Buddhism and Christianity. What's wrong with Jesus, he says. Didn't Jesus speak of heaven? Isn't heaven Buddha's nirvana? According to your own interpretation, Smith. Ray says he feels suppressed by the schism they have about separating Buddhism from Christianity, East from West. Quote, what the hell difference does it make? We're all in heaven now, ain't we? But despite Smith's assertion that it doesn't make a difference what religion one chooses, an earlier passage shows readers that it does. Here, Smith recalls a poem that questions God's intentions for man and why man should bother living at all. Who played this cruel joke on bloke after bloke, packing like a rat across the desert flat? Was it God got mad, like the Indian cad who was only a giver, crooked like the river? Gave you a garden, let it all harden, then comes the flood and the loss of your blood? Pray tell us, good buddy, and don't make it muddy, who played this trick on Harry and Dick? And why is so mean this eternal scene? Just what's the point of this whole joint? Then comes the essential statement, quote, I thought maybe I could find out at last from these Dharma bums. So Smith is clearly turning toward Buddhism in hopes of achieving the peace he could not find in Catholicism. When these hopes go unrealized, he plunges into despair and drunkenness. We see this downward turn toward the end of the Dharma Bums when Jaffe asks Ray to attend a, quote, lecture and discussion at the Buddhist Center, and Ray responds, oh, I don't want to go to no such thing. I just want to drink in alleys. By the end of the book, Ray Smith's conflict between Buddhism and Catholicism is apparent to Jaffe Ryder, who forthrightly asks, you really like Christ, don't you? Although Smith answers the question in an attempt to tie Jesus to Buddha, Ryder simply does not buy it. He says, oh, don't start preaching Christianity to me. I can just see you now on your deathbed, kissing the cross like some old Karamazov, or like our old friend Dwight Goddard, who spent his life as a Buddhist and suddenly returned to Christianity in his last days. While we never see Ray Smith on his deathbed, we do know that Kerouac returned to Catholicism in his final years. Jaffe Ryder was right. The novels Kerouac wrote after the Dharma Bums present a view of the world far removed from the hopeful and excited outlook that shapes his earlier work. The novel Big Sur clearly reveals this change, taking the already well-developed dimensions of the religious and adding to it alcoholism, which arguably was fueled by his religious conflict. As Susan Kaori notes, the loss of faith in Buddhist doctrine and in himself is further verified by Jack's vision of the cross in his time of greatest need, that time spent alone with the sea and his addiction to alcohol, of which he wrote in Big Sur. Big Sur presents Kerouac in despair, and try as he might, neither Jesus nor Buddha is ultimately able to save him. In September of 1961, Jack Kerouac was embroiled in a legal battle with former wife Joan Haverty over the paternity of their daughter Jan. It was in the midst of this stormy period that Kerouac sat down to write Big Sur, a chronicle of the 6 weeks he spent in Lawrence Ferlinghetti's cabin during the summer of 1960. Big Sur, a historic bohemian community of Monterey, is the setting for this haunting, sad, and explosive representation of Kerouac in the throes of physical, mental, and spiritual crisis. The novel documents Kerouac's attempt to rediscover himself and regain his psychic equilibrium, and he looks to both Jesus and Buddha for assistance. Some of the scenes in Big Sur recall moments from Visions of Gerard and the Dharma Bums, but here they unfold in the disturbing light cast by his deteriorated physical and spiritual health. The climax of the novel centers on Kerouac's final vision of the cross, which marks his return to Catholicism and renunciation of Buddhism. Kerouac opens the novel with the sound of church bells, but instead of soothing him, the sound is virtually unbearable as it awakens him to the reality of what he views as another personal failure. The church is blowing a sad wind-blown Kathleen on the bells in the Skid Row slums as I wake up all woebegone and goopy, groaning from another drinking bout and groaning most of all because I'd ruined my secret return to San Francisco by getting silly drunk. The Kerouac character in Big Sur, Jack Kerouac, then reveals that he had planned for a secret escape to his friend Lorenz Monsanto's cabin in the Big Sur woods. Kerouac writes that he had to retreat to the cabin to escape from the whirlwind that by that time ensconced him as the king of the beats. Quote, finally realizing that I was surrounded and outnumbered and had to get away to solitude again or die. Kerouac looked to his sojourn in Big Sur as a chance to defeat his alcoholism, or at the very least to dry out for a few weeks, thereby keeping Satan at bay for a time, and prove once again that grace is possible. By crossing the Rayton Canyon Bridge, which Kerouac establishes as a symbolic bridge between his current state of physical, mental, and spiritual anguish and the peace he seeks, Kerouac hopes to begin the healing process. And his first few days in the cabin are peaceful, and readers are reminded of the joy and beauty a healthy-minded Kerouac could find in the simple activities of daily life. Quote, marvelous opening moment, in fact, of the first afternoon. I'm self-alone in the cabin, and I make my first meal, wash my first dishes, nap, and wake up to hear the rapturous ring of silence of heaven even within and throughout the gurgle of the creek. When you say, am alone, and the cabin is suddenly home only because you made one meal and washed your first meal dishes, then nightfall, the religious vestal lighting of the beautiful kerosene lamp, and careful washing of the mantle in the creek. Although he claimed to be through with Buddhism by this point in his life, Kerouac's many references to the religion show that Buddha still occupied a place in his increasingly ravaged soul. For example, Kerouac overtly equates himself with a Buddhist figure when he writes, quote, the bhikkhu's home in his woods, he only wants peace, peace he will get. Though why, after 3 weeks of perfect happy peace and adjustment in these strange woods, my soul so went down the drain, I'll never know. Worth the telling only if I dig deep into everything. This passage points to the fact that while Buddhism still might provide Kerouac with a romantic notion of how to approach life, it simply was not enough to keep his soul from circling the drain. In describing a bout of delirium tremens, he writes, you feel a guilt so deep you identify yourself with the devil, and God seems far away, abandoning you to your sick silliness. From feeling that God is far away, Kerouac progresses to feeling that God is nowhere at all. Quote, he'll want to bury his face in his hands and moan for mercy, and he knows there is none. Not only because he doesn't deserve it, but there's no such thing anyway. Because he looks up at the blue sky and there's nothing there but empty space making a big face at him. Kerouac's condition spirals from irrationality into full-blown paranoia and terror, and he begins to make even more references to the Christian God and the condition of his own soul, which he notes is in a state of, quote, adulthood disaster. As Kerouac lies awake at night battling his demons, he has a vision that marks his official return to Catholicism. An argot of sudden screamed reports rattles through my head in a language I never heard but understand immediately. For a moment I see blue heaven and the Virgin's white veil, but suddenly a great evil blur like an ink spot spreads over it. The devil's come after me tonight. Tonight is the night, that's what. But angels are laughing and having a big barn dance in the rocks of the sea. Nobody cares anymore. Suddenly as clear as anything I ever saw in my life, I see the cross. I lie there in cold sweat, wondering what's come over me. For years, my Buddhist studies and pipe-smoking, assured meditations on emptiness, and all of a sudden the cross is manifested to me. My eyes fill with tears. We'll all be saved. Thus, Duluoz is officially setting his Buddhism aside and reaffirming his allegiance to the Catholic Church. Kerouac closes Big Sur with the assertion that something good will come out of all things yet, and it will be golden and eternal just like that. There's no need to say another word. But Kerouac's most prophetic statement about the fate of his soul comes just after his revelation that we'll all be saved, when he writes, "I've seen the cross again and again, but there's a battle somewhere and the devils keep coming back." As illustrated in several of the novels Kerouac wrote after Big Sur, while he claimed to be a devout Catholic once again, this spiritual battle raged on in him until his dying day. Sadly, since neither Buddha nor Christ could restore peace to his soul, it remained for the bottle to put an end to his earthly suffering. I think if any religion could have saved Kerouac, it would have been Buddhism, which I realize some don't even consider a religion. Catholicism never stood a chance, though, given its undeniable role in necessitating that Kerouac be saved at all. I believe Kerouac's alcoholism was fueled by a fundamental self-hatred. Before he'd even learned how to read, Kerouac was absorbing messages that the following lesson, which he and his young classmates would later memorize and recite, neatly summarizes. This catechism lesson on original sin is presented as a series of questions and answers. Here are the answers, which imply the questions. Adam and Eve, on account of their sin, lost innocence and holiness and were doomed to sickness and death. On account of the disobedience of our first parents, we all share in their sin and punishment, as we should have shared in their happiness if they had remained faithful. Our nature was corrupted by the sin of our first parents, which darkened our understanding, weakened our will, and left us in a strong inclination to evil. The sin which we inherit from our first parents is called original sin. This sin is called original because it comes down to us from our first parents, and we are brought into the world with its guilt on our soul. This corruption of our nature and other punishments remain in us after original sin is forgiven. This is brainwashing. Through this kind of education, Kerouac had also learned to equate lust, and therefore sex, with sinfulness. The Dharma Bums contains repeated mentions of his persona, Ray Smith, actively pushing away lustful thoughts, striving for celibacy. He feels ashamed of his naked body. I think I've said this before on Time and Other Thieves, but it bears repeating. When sex, arguably the most pleasurable experience a human can have, is equated with badness of any kind, the human psyche does not fare well. Very problematic things happen. The ways in which sex-based neuroses manifest will depend on the individual, but turning to substances is obviously a pretty common one in our society. I believe that Catholicism's more guilt-inducing lessons are largely what created Kerouac's self-hatred and resulting alcoholism. So to think that Catholicism could save him, it's preposterous. It's like what J. Krishnamurti said about consciousness not being able to change consciousness, but it's like that on steroids. My sister Emily writes, in the final years of his life, Kerouac devoted much time to drawing representations of the crucifixion, meditating on the cross over his bed, and, as he told Ted Berrigan in 1968, praying to Jesus to preserve my sanity and my energy so I can help my family. Regardless of these efforts, he still could not attain spiritual contentment, became increasingly depressed, cynical, and lonely, especially after Neil Cassidy's death in 1967, and literally drank himself to death. On October 21st, 1969, Jack Kerouac died at St. Anthony's Hospital in St. Petersburg, Florida, of hemorrhaging esophageal varices after 26 blood transfusions. He was 47 years old. He had a traditional Catholic funeral and is buried in Edson Catholic Cemetery in Lowell, Massachusetts. The priest who officiated at the ceremony had known Kerouac when he was growing up in Lowell and recited a wonderfully appropriate verse from Ecclesiastes. They shall rest from their words and take their works with them. Jack most excitedly felt he had something to tell the world, and he was determined to do it. Our hope and our prayer is that Jack has now found complete liberation, sharing the visions of Gerard. Amen. Alleluia. That's going to do it for this episode of Time and Other Thieves. Big thanks to my sister, Emily Simpson, for letting me use her master's thesis, Religious Turmoil, the Conflict Between Buddhism and Catholicism, in Jack Kerouac's life and writing. I hope you'll check out the next episode, in which I'll explore some of the ideas presented in the book Walden by Henry David Thoreau. I'll leave you with this lovely Kerouac quote, which I came across in a book by Kathleen Dowling Singh. He says, "Listen to the silence inside the illusion of the world, and you will remember the lesson you forgot, which was taught in immense Milky Way soft cloud innumerable words long ago and not even at all. It is one vast awakened thing. It is perfect."